Is Lauren Anthony with a report.
Thousands of Central African Republic refugees at this hard-to-reach camp in the Democratic Republic of Congo are sleeping out in the open in makeshift shelters. They have little or no access to sanitation, drinking water and food. Authorities in the DRC estimate that there are 92,000 Central African refugees there after election-linked violence erupted in December last year. Some have been welcomed by host families. Reports indicate that up to 3 refugee families are living in a single small home in the remote border areas. Waki Paul is one refugee enduring the dire conditions.
When we arrived, our living conditions were difficult. Finding food was difficult. We couldn't go back there because night and day there was the sound of gunfire. It's not possible to go back there because if you go back there and things happen again and it finds you there, what will you say? We'll endure here until God touches someone's heart to help us.
The UN Refugee Agency, or UNHCR, is trying to establish the number of new arrivals and to identify those with specific needs or vulnerabilities. It's working to relocate refugees to safer sites where they can receive better humanitarian assistance and protection. Nearly a third of the Central African Republic's population of 4.7 million have been forced to flee after years of on-off conflict. The gold and diamond-rich country has failed to find stability since the 2013 rebellion. The UN says nearly half of the national territory is occupied by armed groups.
Lauren Anthony of Reuters filed that report. A pregnant woman and 5 other people died when an ambulance carrying them hit a landmine in northern Burkina Faso, according to the government. The ambulance was carrying the woman, her husband, and a girl and 2 other women between the towns of Gaskinde and Namisigua near Burkina Faso's border with Mali on Tuesday. No group immediately claimed responsibility for laying the landmine. Attacks in Burkina Faso by fighters linked to Al-Qaeda and Islamic State have risen sharply over the last 3 years, displacing more than 1 million people. In Washington, Federal Bureau of Investigation Director Christopher Wray told U.S. lawmakers on Tuesday that the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol by pro-Trump rioters trying to overturn Joe Biden's election victory was domestic terrorism. As WEWE's congressional correspondent Kathleen Gibson reports, Ray admitted the Bureau did have raw intelligence warning of violence that day.
We need angry attention. For the first time since the January 6 riot at the U.S. Capitol, one of the nation's top law enforcement officials telling lawmakers Tuesday that riot was domestic terrorism, fueled in large part by white supremacist groups that represent a serious threat in the United States.
It has been the biggest chunk of our racially motivated violent extremism cases and itself the biggest chunk of our domestic terrorism caseload overall. And the most lethality over the last decade has been from these same extremists.
In his first testimony since the attempted insurrection, Ray said the rioters came from a broad range of groups supporting white supremacy and militia violence, and that there is no evidence for allegations they were fake Trump protesters or disguised left-wing protesters.
While we're equal opportunity and looking for violent extremism of any ideology, we have not to date seen any evidence of anarchist violent extremists or people subscribing to Antifa in connection with the 6th. That doesn't mean we're not looking, and we'll continue to look, but at the moment we have not seen that.
More than 270 people have been charged to date for their roles in that riot, and the FBI investigations are expanding, said Ray.
With more subjects being identified and charged just about every single day. The FBI is committed to seeing this through, no matter how many people it takes.
Many Republicans arguing the domestic terror threat is equaled or surpassed by left-wing extremists, such as Antifa, citing the burning of a federal courthouse in Portland, Oregon last summer.
In the past year, we have seen massive rioting and violence as extremists, many of them leftist extremists, took to the streets across the country.
But Democrats pushed back, arguing lawlessness accompanying some pro-racial justice demonstrations pale in comparison to violent white supremacy.
It is not equivalent to a violent attempt to overturn the results of elections, nor is it equivalent to mass shootings targeting minority communities. This false equivalency is an insult to the brave police officers who were injured or lost their lives on January 6th.
In a House hearing last week, Capitol security officials revealed they had not received a January 5th FBI bulletin warning of possible violence. Ray declined to speculate on how security precautions might have been altered if that warning had been read.
You know, I really want to be careful not to be an armchair quarterback.
Negotiations for a commission that would investigate the attacks and recommend security precautions have stalled as House Speaker Nancy Pelosi pushes for more Democrats than Republicans to sit on that panel. Catherine Gibson, VOA News, Washington.
We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, a Rwandan firm seeks to revolutionize how people charge phones, conduct mobile money transfers, and more. We'll be right back.
Wealthy countries started buying the first COVID-19 vaccine supplies last year. How can lower-income countries compete? To make COVID-19 vaccine access more equitable, global health institutions developed COVAX. Rather than competing against each other, countries pool their resources. COVAX invests in many different vaccines, so countries aren't stuck if some fail. Each country in COVAX gets enough of the successful vaccines to cover a percentage of its population, especially frontline health workers and the most vulnerable. But COVAX has not worked as well as hoped. Countries are still making one-on-one deals with vaccine makers, taking up limited supplies. And COVAX is underfunded by tens of billions of dollars. In a global pandemic, new, dangerous variants can appear wherever the virus is allowed to spread. It's already happened in Britain, Brazil, and South Africa. If these variants undermine the vaccines, the world goes back to square one. Health experts say no one is safe until everyone is safe.
Welcome back to Africa 54. In 2019, Lonnie Bunch became the first African-American and first historian to become secretary of the Smithsonian Institution, the museum's highest office. After almost 18 months on the job, he spoke with VOA's Julie Tabo to share the highlights and challenges of his tenure so far.
By unanimous vote, we have placed our trust in Lonnie G. Bunch III to be the 14th Secretary of the Smithsonian Institution.
On November 1st, 2019, the Smithsonian Institution in Washington installed Lonnie Bunch as its 14th secretary.
Congratulations, Mr. Secretary.
During his acceptance speech, Bunch shared a story about a 1960s road trip with his father.
He pulled in front of the Smithsonian, and then he said to me, "You could visit the Smithsonian and not worry about being turned away by the color of your skin." I have never forgotten that moment.
Bunch is the first African-American and first historian to hold the Smithsonian's highest office.
I think of my grandfather and grandmother. They started out as sharecroppers. And she used to take in other people's laundry and scrub other people's floors so her children and grandchildren wouldn't have to. Well, because they changed the trajectory, I am where I am. And so I want to make sure that what I can do is help change other people's trajectories.
As secretary, Bunch oversees the world's largest museum, education, and research complex, with 19 museums and the National Zoological Park. He has worked at the Smithsonian for decades.
The goal of the museum is to make America better.
Previously, he was the founding director of the National Museum of African American History and Culture, which has welcomed more than 6 million visitors since it opened in September 2016. The museum is devoted exclusively to exploring, documenting, and showcasing the African American story and its impact on American and world history. It's home to a collection of 40,000 objects.
The one that resonates with me, that makes me cry every day, is Emmett Till's casket. Mainly because I became close to his mother as I was getting ready to leave Chicago.
Till was a black teenager who was kidnapped and brutally murdered by white men in Mississippi in the summer of 1955. Bunch recalls the strength of Till's mother.
What I realized is that the casket was really not a way to talk about Emmett Till's broken body, but it was a way to talk about the strength of women. Now, here is a black woman at the worst moment of her life, said, I will use that to challenge America, to reinvigorate or reignite the civil rights movement.
Since becoming secretary, Bunch has had to grapple with the challenge of the pandemic, which has forced the museums to close and focus more on their online presence.
We knew at the Smithsonian that we needed to be more digital. If you have 39, 40 million people come to your door every year, you're like, wow, that's pretty good. But that's a small percentage of what could come to you digitally. It's been a moment where it's allowed me to begin to think about reimagining the Smithsonian, reimagining our educational output, reimagining how we serve the public, because my goal was not to simply get through the moment, but to use the moment to propel us forward.
To look forward while still remembering the past. Julie Tabo, VOA News, Washington.
After a year of protests and quarantine closures, some shops across America have been boarded up and the plywood used as a canvas by artists and protesters. Natasha Moscovia reports from Seattle on what will happen to what many see as protest art depicting an important part of U.S. history.
In the heart of Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood, graffiti and murals cover walls and pieces of plywood guarding shop windows. The largest display for mass protests last summer includes the words Black Lives Matter painted on the road. It stretches for the whole block on East Pine Street.
Painted the L, love, legacy, life.
15 local artists collaborated on this, each bringing their unique style to the project.
For myself, I do a self-portrait that's a shark, sunflower, like octopus tentacles. And it's more or less like everyone sees my personality is very bright, very fun, but I'm a crazy person. And then, of course, the main attraction is the beautiful black women. I like to depict them kind of as giants or goddesses, because as a black man, they've been a very big, pivotal part of my life.
The mural, painted at the height of summer protests sparked by the death of George Floyd, has been called a symbol of free speech and civil rights. To preserve it, Seattle's Arts and Culture Office joined the artists and the city's Department of Transportation to get the work fully repainted.
The time we did it was more of a street art, graffiti kind of thing where we didn't really ask permission, we just took claim. The second time around, it was definitely a mural. We got paid, we're going to make sure this is done right.
For some letters, it took as many as 5 layers of paint to ensure it can withstand street conditions. The process was a moment of collaboration as the city, which was the focus of protesters' frustrations at times, reconfigured the road and added traffic diverters to protect the mural.
So it's supposed to stay for about 5 years, but I'm hoping it stays forever. I hope it becomes a part of Seattle culture and reminding that we really need to take black lives seriously, not for granted. We're just like you.
This mural belongs to the people. This mural belongs to the artists. We're just there to offer our assistance and resources.
The city code requires small business owners to either clean up graffiti on their property or face fines. In the spontaneous outburst of protest art, though, it is not always clear where the line between vandalism and art is.
We do know that, we should at least preserve some of these murals that have been created on businesses and trying to do our best to preserve this because, it's one of those moments in history that you want to capture and preserve to sort of, show what we went through as a culture, as a country.
That plywood belongs to the owner of that business and or building in most cases. And so it's up to them on if they want to donate it or they want to keep it themselves. But the main goal is preservation to tell the story and remember this moment in history.
Not all Seattle residents remember the protests as something to be celebrated. There were acts of violence and destruction by some of the protesters, leading to clashes with police as authorities attempted to regain control over the rioting. A large patch of bulldozed soil in Cal Anderson Park is all that is left of a self-declared autonomous zone, the CHOP created by the protesters. Pieces that were made there are now traveling with activists around Seattle.
This is one of the black fists that was from the chop art. And then we have about, I want to say close to like 200 pieces of plywood from the boards and barricades that were in the chop. I was actually arrested trying to stop the chop art from being taken from the chop. So I feel I'm very passionate about this.
Today, most of the protesters' camp artwork is in a storage facility and is subject to an ownership dispute between the protest veterans. As for the plywood murals, some shop owners plan to display them, return them to the artists, or donate them to local non-profits and museums. Natasha Moscovia, WEWE News, Seattle.
In our tech news, a Rwandan innovation firm, ARED, is using the state-of-the-art innovative business model to provide Wi-Fi, low-cost phone charging, airtime sales, mobile money transfers, and other services. ARED has created jobs and empowers women and people with disabilities in rural and urban communities. For more insight, Africa 54 technology correspondent Paul Diho via Skype spoke to Henry Nyakarundi, CEO and founder of ARED Group in Kigali, Rwanda.
Henry Nyakarundi, welcome to Africa 54.
Man, thanks for inviting me on the show.
The last time we talked, you were working on a kiosk. You had literally just started working on this smart solar kiosk in Kigali, Rwanda. Bring me up to speed. What have you been up to?
Yeah, so when we first met, we were focusing on just energy. So we had developed this solar kiosk platform to provide phone charging services. Today, we've evolved the technology much further. Now we also do phone charging, but we're mostly focusing on connectivity. So in the meantime, we developed what we call a edge solution on the mini server. So the idea now of the kiosk is to becoming a one-stop shop access to not just phone charging, but also access to digital applications using Wi-Fi. So user, especially low-income people, can access information on their phone without having internet on their phone. And that's really what our new value proposition is. And then the good thing is now we've been able to expand. We're in 4 countries right now. We're adding 2 countries this year. But on the technology side, that has been the biggest change.
Why would one want to come to your kiosk as opposed to going to MTN or Airtel?
You get the same service as MTN or Airtel, plus more. Airtel, MTN don't have Wi-Fi connectivity or edge technology. They don't have phone charging services on their kiosk. So, you know, the value is right there. Now you can get all your services from one location. And we even added now government services where you can pay your taxes, so on and so forth. So it's a true one-stop shop. So if you're a customer, you come to our kiosk, you want to charge your phone, that's great. But let's say you need to buy airtime or you need to transfer money, you can do that also. Let's say you want to download content or see, you know, or check the news or so on and so forth, you can do that also. So we really wanted to build a one-stop shop for digital access.
How do people access those services? Do they have to come to that kiosk for them to be able to access the news, for example, or anything, any content online? Or there is a way they can tap into your Wi-Fi connection to be able to do that remotely without being able to come to your kiosk?
No, so it's a connectivity on the go, we call it. So it's really for people that are in public places, you know, when you're waiting for your bus, if you're in a marketplace while shopping, anywhere there's a high traffic of people, whether it's in rural area, semi-urban area, or refugee camps, that's where we focus on. We don't focus on home connectivity. We really focus on connectivity on the go, while you're on the go. And of course, the Wi-Fi radius is about 100 meters. So you don't need to be very close, but you have to be on our radius.
Is it a free service?
Some of them is free, some of them it's not. It depends what service you're talking about. The Wi-Fi access is free, but we generate money through on the business level. So businesses use our platform to distribute what they want to distribute on our Wi-Fi platform.
Your goal is to revolutionize how technology is distributed, especially when it comes to these phones that we use or simple things that we do every day. Can you speak more about that?
You know, what we're trying to do is connect the unconnected. You know, in Africa, statistically, 70% of the population are still not connected to the internet or still not using the internet. That's a huge number. If you look at business today, e-commerce, digital money, because mobile money use USSD, but digital money needs internet. All this internet business are focusing on the 30%. And that's the challenge. Everybody's focusing on the 30% of the population that is connected. The middle class, you know, or lower middle class. But there's 70% of the population not connected. And that's where we're focusing on. Our goal is to connect the unconnected. It's a huge market, but it's a very challenging market because it's not just about connectivity. It's about educating the people about the connectivity you're providing. It's also, you know, it's a very long-term investment structure, and that's what we do at ERED.
Well, Henry, thank you so much for your time.
Man, thank you, Paul. Man, always a pleasure, man, talking to you. Man.
That was Africa 54's technology correspondent Paul Ndiho speaking to Henry Nyakarundi, CEO and founder of ERED Group in Kigali, Rwanda. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at WEWEAfrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, we thank you for watching.
Chato Beach Resort ya wilayani Chato mkoani Geita. Sehemu pekee mkoani Geita yenye mapumziko ya kweli, kwani una kila sababu ya kupumzika Chato Beach Resort kwa kuwa usafiri wa kuja na kuingia Chato ni wa uhakika. Kwa safari za ndege za Jumatatu, Alhamisi na Jumamosi. Na sasa tutakusaidia kupanga safari za kitalii Burigi na Rubondo. Karibu. Hapa ndiyo Chato Beach Resort, upepo wa Ziwa Victoria unapovuma. Chato Beach Resort, mapumziko ya kweli.